So, our gospel appointed for today, for the feast of St. James, always causes me to chuckle when I hear it. Because can you imagine a more embarrassing mom story than your mom going up to Jesus and saying, "Hey, my kids are special, right? Like, yeah, they deserve something a little special, right? Cut them a little slack, give them a special place to sit and whatnot." And if that's not then bad enough, a few verses later, if you caught this, maybe this is just my mind that chuckles at this. So it says, and the 10. Matthew, in recording this gospel, has separated these two, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, and they've been ostracized by the rest of the group. They've quit calling themselves the 12. They're the 10 at that point. They have said, nope, no, y'all have embarrassed us a little too much. Often then think of them, again, mothers coming, trying to talk Jesus into giving them some special treatment. In my mind's eye, they're teenagers. I don't know how old they were, probably closer to Jesus's age, maybe 30-ish, which maybe also makes that even more embarrassing. I don't know. It causes me to chuckle quite a bit, though. But their mother, Salome, she wanted the best for her sons, right? Her sons were great. I'm getting rid of this microphone. It's causing me some trouble. Her sons, she just wanted the best for them, right? They had already been called by Jesus, so they were already special in his eyes, she knew, not just in her eyes as a mother. So they might as well be even more special, right? Give them the special place to sit. Now, James and his brother John, their family likely had some wealth and some influence in the region. I mean, their father Zebedee had a prosperous fishing business. James and John were working in that prosperous family business, probably alongside Simon Peter and Andrew. The first 4 disciples Jesus called them out of their fishing boats from, well, this family that everyone knew. They already had the prestige, they already had the name recognition. And if that wasn't enough, it's quite likely, quite possible, that their mother, Salome, was Jesus' mother's, Mary's sister or cousin. So, I mean, this is his aunt coming up to him and saying, your cousins are even more, right? It's just an embarrassing scene all around. And Jesus continues to call these brothers and the others to love and serve and follow him. Jesus doesn't let the embarrassment of the moment get in the way of the big picture. James and his brother John they had another reputation to them as well. They had a nickname around town. They were the Sons of Thunder, as we hear in another gospel account. They were perhaps a little arrogant, perhaps a bit zealous, energetic. They were known for making a scene. And this continued even after Jesus had called them. There's another story in Matthew's gospel before we get to the embarrassing one today with his mother, where James asks Jesus, "Will you show us your power by just calling down fire from heaven onto this Samaritan village? I mean, they're just Samaritans anyway. So can't you they didn't really like us. Can't you call down fire on them?" And again, they got rebuked and were embarrassed in front of the rest of their friends, the other followers of Jesus. They were passionate. And that passion continued. They had some growing to do, some learning, maybe some rough edges. But Jesus called these passionate brothers, James in particular, and even invited James, along with Peter and John, into the inner circle. Not just in that first crowd of followers, that first group of disciples, but called them in to see the things hardly anyone else got to see. That circle of 3 saw the raising of Jairus' daughter after she was thought to have died. They got to see the transfiguration where Jesus appeared in glowing, radiant light on the holy mountain. They got to see Jesus' agony in the garden up close and personal. The embarrassment of the moment, whatever moment it might have been, didn't cloud the whole picture. It didn't stop or negate their calling. After Jesus' death and resurrection and ascension, it said that St. James went on to take on the leading role in the early church in Jerusalem. That in this holiest of holy cities, this most passionate, most zealous, perhaps even jump the gun kind of embarrassing person got to lead the church in its earliest days as it was trying to figure itself out. None of the moments of embarrassment clouded the bigger vision. And James was passionate all the way to the end. So as we have prayed in the collect, as we heard in our opening hymn, and then as we heard in the reading from the Acts of the Apostles, James was the first of the apostles to be martyred. He was the first of that inner core group of followers of Jesus, those earliest leaders of the church. He was the first among them to die for being a Christian. And as Christian tradition and history would have it, St. Clement of Alexandria, in talking about St. James's death, records the story well known among the church in Jerusalem at the time, that when James was beheaded by the order of King Agrippa, the guard who had been with him, the guard who had been holding him captive up until the moment of his execution, was so moved by St. James's faith that he himself converted and was beheaded alongside him. This passionate leader of the church, zealous all the way to the end, never gave up testifying to the power of God, to the miracle that he knew because he saw it, of the resurrection of Jesus, and the hope that would live far beyond any pain of death. Jesus had asked, can you drink this cup that I'm about to drink? The cup of his death, of his sacrifice. They said they could, and they did. The apostles all went on to die for their faith. And as we've been talking in our Sunday morning adult formation series, it's one more plug for that in case you haven't yet had the chance to join us. So we've been studying the saints of the church. We learned that the first saints, the first ones named, officially by the church as such, one of the qualifications was that you had to have died for your faith. All of the apostles, all of the early church leaders, including St. James, the first among them, had drank that cup. And over time, the church grew to understand that one can die to self without necessarily shedding blood, but it is about the willingness to give up who we are to follow Jesus. To say it another way, it's the calling to maybe even embarrass ourselves a little bit along the way as we follow Jesus. It's the call, if you caught it, what wonderful words to sing in our opening hymn this morning, this prayer. Lord, curb our vain impatience for glory and for fame. Equip us for such sufferings as glorify your name. Wasn't that a happy message for this, our big parish feast day? Prayers for suffering. prayers that we might die to self, to passionately, maybe even embarrassingly, following Jesus for all of our lives. It wasn't just that guard who was watching St. James who was inspired by him to grow in the faith, to even give his life for the faith. Over time, the relics, the remains of St. James were taken to Spain and became the third largest Christian pilgrimage site all throughout the centuries. Even last year, 500,000 pilgrims were still, all of these years later, centuries later, 500,000 pilgrims going just to get close, to this one who had died for the faith. But as with every pilgrimage, yes, there's a great destination, but it really is more about the journey. It is more about that walk of life, of following Christ, of denying oneself to be on the journey with Jesus. It's that journeying that does the sanctifying work, that calls us to remember our reliance on God as the one who provides all that we need. And the good news out of all of this, out of hearing the gospel, out of the life of St. James, out of the call and witness of his martyrdom, is the reminder that we all know already that we don't have to fear death. In fact, we don't even have to fear embarrassment, and I don't know which one's worse as we follow Christ. We have nothing to fear. Think about it. We have nothing to fear. Whatever it is in our personal lives, whatever it is in the world around us, in our community, we have nothing to fear. So maybe it is time to go be passionate and zealous and even embarrass ourselves a little bit along the way. When we're not even afraid of death or embarrassment, we're free to follow Jesus as fearlessly, as fiercely, as courageously as we can, to shine Christ's light in a world that all too often wants to focus on the darkness around us. When we don't have to fear death because we remember the one who we're following on the way. We can even be those ones who are unashamed to name the God that we worship is the one who comes down and gets into the mess of life with us, the one who knows death firsthand, the one who knows pain and suffering with us, the one who sees our humanity and shows us what life can really be all about, who calls us into new and greater life. And with that comes another piece of good news. As we're following Jesus, we don't have to have it all figured out. James had already been called by Jesus, had already been following him, learning from him, hearing his teaching, seeing his miracles. And still one of his first thoughts was, that town didn't like us and they're expendable anyway. Jesus, cast some fire down on them. Because he still had room to grow. He still had room to learn. He still had room to embarrass himself as he so passionately followed Jesus all the way to the end. Jesus called James and John and Andrew and Peter out of their boats and said, "Follow me." And they said yes, and that was enough. He said yes, and that was enough. Jesus didn't say, "Come to my seminar first," or "Come spend a year in church first," or "Come, let me teach you all of these things and then follow me." He just said, "Follow me." That's the same call Jesus has for all of us, personally collectively as a parish. God is still calling us. He says, look at Jesus. Follow Jesus. Friends, we're still figuring things out individually, as a parish, as a world. There's going to be more embarrassment. We're going to get some things wrong. But may we be so inspired by the passion, by the zealousness, by the fervor of folks like St. James to follow wherever God leads the way, to not fear death or embarrassment, and to trust that it's not actually about the destination, but the journey with Jesus. Amen.